The icy air of Hangar 17 in Des Moines, Iowa, cut through the night, heavy with the metallic scent of jet fuel and the distant hum of dormant machinery. A shiver ran down Felipe's spine. At 32, he was an aircraft maintenance technician, a man of few words and an ever-attentive gaze. His nightly routine was a silent ballet among metal giants. He moved along the imposing fuselage of the Boeing 747, the weak, flickering beam of his flashlight dancing over the cold metal, revealing hidden details on the vast, sleeping behemoth. As his hand brushed against an almost imperceptible fissure on the right wing, a flaw that routine inspections might easily miss, a peculiar electric shock coursed through him. It wasn't the static electricity of metal, but something far deeper, more visceral. In a fraction of a second that stretched into an eternity, the hangar's darkness gave way to a vivid and terrifying vision, a blinding flash engulfing the night sky, followed by the high-pitched metallic shriek of an aircraft disintegrating in midair, a sound of pure terror and destruction, and the heavy, final silence that followed so absolute it seemed to absorb even the sound of his own ragged breath. The nauseating smell of burning jet fuel and smoke invaded his nostrils, suffocating him. This was no dream, no feverish hallucination. It was the death of a flight that hadn't even taken off yet, and the certainty of it chilled him to the bone, planting the seed of primordial fear deep within him. Felipe staggered backward, his hands instinctively clutching his head, as if he could somehow contain the catastrophic image still burning in his mind like an invisible flame. Cold sweat streamed down his forehead, carving small, damp trails as the hangar's air conditioning, which now seemed to chill him to the bone, hummed around him. He knew this aircraft flight, 817 to Seattle, a scheduled night flight with dozens of passengers set for the following morning. "I saw it. I felt it," Felipe insisted, his voice choked with urgency, almost a plea. And the amplified sound of his own footsteps, which seemed to echo a funerary rhythm. Maintenance was done on schedule. Everything's in order. It's cleared for flight. Felipe snatched the papers and frantically flipped through them, his eyes scanning the lines of text with silent but ineffectual fury. "It doesn't matter what it says here. I'm not crazy, Miguel. I'm not clearing this aircraft. I can't." The colossal weight of the decision resting on his shoulders like an anchor. The tension was almost physical, overwhelming. He had dodged a bullet. He had prevented the death of many people. But for how long? The premonition had saved him from the guilt of a tragedy, but at the same time, it had cursed him with a terrible, undeniable knowledge and a sense of imminent persecution. The metallic taste of fear was in his mouth, a bitter, persistent flavor. He felt that, somehow, fate had not been tricked, only delayed, and that death would not so easily give up its harvest, now thirsty for vengeance. "I won't let these people die from a flaw no one else sees, but I know is there." The smell of oil and metal, so familiar and comforting on other occasions, now seemed to carry a strange hint of smoke and imminent destruction, a grim premonition of fatality. He knew Felipe wasn't one for dramatics. You know what this means, don't you? Massive delays, heavy fines, serious questions from the F. Your career could be on the line, Felipe. The company could sue you for this. He leaned in, running his hand over the fissure that had triggered the vision. The metal's texture seemed to vibrate beneath his fingers, a resonance of the impending disaster, an echo of what was to come. He closed his eyes, and the vision returned, stronger, more detailed, windows shattering into thousands of shimmering fragments, flames devouring the fuselage with terrifying voracity, consuming lives. Despair tightened its grip on his chest, suffocating him. He had to stop it, no matter the cost. The seriousness in Felipe's eyes was unmistakable, and Miguel, who had known his colleague for years and was aware of his pragmatic nature, rarely saw him so distraught. Miguel sighed heavily and, reluctantly, began pulling dusty log folders from the shelf. Meanwhile, Felipe, unable to stand, still rushed back to the plane, flashlight in hand, examining every inch of the damaged wing. But I'd rather face all of that than have the blood of dozens of innocents on my hands. Miguel, after a long, weary sigh, slowly nodded. All right, Felipe. You're my friend, but the responsibility is yours. I'll call the supervisor and tell him the plane is under technical retention due to suspected unidentified structural failure. That's the most I can do for you without outright lying. As if the premonition had left a physical mark invisible to the naked eye, but screamingly clear to him. The plane, after its final inspection, was due to be cleared for the first flight of the day, a routine procedure. But the image of the explosion was so real, so palpable, that he could feel the impact reverberating in his own bones. It can't be real, he murmured, his voice hoarse, barely audible in the hangar's vast, oppressive space, which suddenly felt like a mausoleum. Driven by a desperate urgency, pure adrenaline coursing through his veins, he sprinted towards the quality control area, his heart pounding against his ribs, almost leaping from his chest. I need the Flight 817 logs, now, he demanded of a sleepy colleague, Miguel, a burly, mustached man in his 40s, who was more preoccupied with finishing his coffee than attending to Felipe's frantic demands. Miguel looked at him with a raised eyebrow, still half asleep and visibly annoyed. Again, Felipe, what is it now? Nightmares about turbines. You look like you've seen a ghost. It's no nightmare, Miguel. There's something wrong with that plane. The hangar's silence was now oppressive. A vacuum punctuated only by the distant hum of ventilation. Miguel finally arrived, dragging himself along with a stack of papers in his hands, his face exhausted. Look, Felipe, the logs are clean. Miguel, seeing the unwavering determination in Felipe's eyes, a genuine panic mixed with an almost fanatical conviction, hesitated. I know, Felipe interrupted, his voice firm despite the uncontrollable trembling in his hands. Felipe watched Miguel walk away, his silhouette shrinking in the vastness of the hangar. The following morning brought not peace, but a perfect storm of bureaucracy and suspicious glances, mixed with the fury of management. The shift supervisor, Robert Bob Peterson, 50, bald and red-faced from chronic stress and a distinct lack of patience, was yelling into the phone while Felipe tried to explain the inexplicable. The weather outside, dark and gray with heavy skies, seemed to mirror the tense and charged atmosphere inside the room, where the pressure was almost unbearable. Boss, Felipe is one of our best, a stellar professional. He's never been one to make things up or cause trouble for the company. And the crushing weight of suspicious, even hostile glances from colleagues who saw him as an eccentric or irresponsible liability. He felt like a pariah, isolated, marked by an experience no one understood. The constant ringing of his phone at home, text messages from unknown numbers, and the disturbing sensation of being watched contributed to his growing paranoia. The list of victims' names was read aloud, and Felipe recognized some of the passengers he had seen on Flight 817's manifest, their faces projected onto the screen, now lifeless, looking back at him like specters. The knot in his throat tightened, making breathing difficult and painful. He had tried to trick death, but it was cunning, relentless, and seemed to possess a dark intelligence, an ability to adapt and claim what was its own. And what else would it do to exact its revenge, to rebalance the scales? He felt trapped in an invisible web, a slow-motion snare. If he's saying this, it's serious. Please, believe him. Who felt the impact in his very soul. A chartered tour bus, carrying some of the passengers from the canceled Flight 817 to a hotel in another city, had been involved in a serious accident on Interstate 80 near a detour. He hadn't foreseen that. What he saw was the explosion in the air, not a bus crash. Fate was adjusting itself, exacting its price in a cruel and unexpected way, seeking a lost balance. He locked himself in his small apartment in Omaha, Nebraska, the strong smell of bitter coffee filling the air and mingling with his own anguish. The distant sirens of police cars and ambulances were a constant reminder of the tragedy that he had, in some way, either caused or merely altered. The bus overturned on a treacherous curve due to the wet road and poor visibility caused by dense fog. Several passengers, those very people who would have been on Flight 817, were among the victims. The shock hit Felipe with overwhelming force. It was a cruel ramification, a curse of fate he had tried to avert, but one that seemed to adapt. He had saved people from an air disaster, only to see them perish in a different, equally brutal way. Felipe stood firm, his posture straight and dignified despite his visible exhaustion and lack of sleep. "Bob, I know what I saw and what I felt. I'm asking you to trust me, just this once. There's something deeply wrong with that aircraft, something our instruments didn't detect, but I know is there." "A premonition, Felipe? Seriously? Are you kidding me? This isn't some sci-fi movie with superpowers. This is a serious airline with millions of dollars at stake. We have schedules to meet, routes to maintain, profits to generate for shareholders. Your vision is going to cost us a fortune." Bob's irritated voice echoed through the small, stuffy office, drowning out the incessant drumming of rain furiously beating against the windows, creating a dissonant chorus of chaos. Miguel, standing by Felipe's side, tried to intervene, his voice calmer, but with a touch of pleading and urgency. Bob, grumbling and visibly annoyed, but weighing Felipe's impeccable track record, finally conceded, more due to the lack of an immediate, plausible alternative than any genuine conviction in Felipe's words. Flight 817's Boeing 747 was pulled from service for a more thorough and time-consuming inspection, a process that would take days, while a replacement flight was hastily arranged, causing hours of delays and inconvenience for passengers. Over the airport loudspeakers, a mechanical voice repeatedly announced the delays, and the passengers' frustration was palpable in the crowded concourses. With each announcement, Felipe felt a shiver run down his spine. He had saved these people, but a strange and persistent feeling that something else was coming deeply troubled him. The victory felt hollow, the relief ephemeral. In the days that followed, Felipe's life became a whirlwind of stress. Exhaustive internal investigations, interrogations by the Ajay. A week later, the bombshell news broke, hitting everyone like a lightning bolt, especially Felipe. The sensation of guilt crushed him, making the air heavy and hard to breathe, as if oxygen had been sucked from the room. "It can't be," he whispered to himself, his eyes glazed over, fixed on the news report on television, which showed the twisted wreckage of the bus under a gray, melancholic sky. With each new death, the net of fate seemed to tighten even further around Felipe, slowly strangling him. The incidents became increasingly bizarre, more personal, more macabre, striking close to his inner circle. And contagious energy died in a mysterious fire in their Kansas City, Missouri, home. The sprinkler system inexplicably failed, and firefighters arrived too late. Speculating about a curse of Flight 817, reporters camped outside the hangar in his old residence, seeking any detail, any word, any clue. The sensation of being watched intensified, making every step a torture, every outing a risk. He avoided leaving his home, curtains always drawn, lights low, hidden from reality and the curious eyes of the world. The constant howl of the wind outside in Des Moines, a city known for its unpredictable storms, felt like a funerary lament, a warning only he could truly decipher. Felipe remembered her smiling at the boarding gate, offering a glass of water to a nervous passenger, her kindness almost tangible. A deafening clap of thunder echoed, rattling the windows, and then a complete blackout plunged everything into absolute darkness. The silence that followed was unsettling, filled only by his own ragged breathing and the accelerated thump of his heart, which felt like it wanted to escape his chest. The smell of ozone and wet earth, typical of a storm, seeped into the room through cracks in the window, strangely sinister, almost like a premonition. He felt a cold, unmistakable presence. He turned abruptly, adrenaline coursing through his veins, his muscles tensed, ready to face whatever it was. No one was there, but the sensation of being watched was undeniable, chilling and oppressive, like an invisible gaze burning into his skin, a phantom touch. The smell of smoke, which seemed to haunt him since the premonition in the hangar, was now stronger in his mind, painfully associated with the image of the burning house and Sarah's face, disintegrating in his memories. Had his intervention, in fact, triggered a series of even worse events, a cosmic revenge, a forced imbalance? The premonition, which once seemed like a blessing, a divine gift, now revealed itself as a curse, an intricate web of death from which he seemed unable to escape. Fate, he realized with a chill that ran down his spine, did not like to be tricked, did not accept interference. And death, he concluded with growing bitterness, would always find its way, no matter how far he ran or how many lives he tried to save from its relentless grip. 2 weeks after the terrible bus accident, the list of fatalities linked to Flight 817 began to grow alarmingly and inexplicably. It wasn't just the passengers. The flight crew, pilots, flight attendants, and even people on the waiting list, who had never even secured a seat on that flight, were dying in increasingly strange ways. It was as if death was following a predetermined script, and each life saved from the plane was replaced by another, in an even crueler and more indirect manner, just to maintain the balance of its harvest. A flight attendant from Flight 817, Sarah Jenkins, 28, known for her easy smile. Days later, the co-pilot, Captain David Miller, 45, experienced and always calm under pressure, suffered a sudden, fatal heart attack while jogging in a park in Denver, Colorado on a sunny morning. He had no history of heart problems. He was a rigorous athlete with impeccable medical records. Miller's wife, shocked and devastated, reported that he had seemed strangely preoccupied in the days leading up to his death, muttering about canceled flights and uncertain destinies, as if he sensed something terrible, a shadow drawing near. Hearing the news on his car radio, Felipe felt a deep chill run down his spine. The air around him felt denser, heavy with the presence of death, almost breathing down his neck, a cold, invisible presence. The pressure on Felipe was immense and constant. The media, hungry for a sensational and tragic story, began connecting the dots. One night, while trying to relax with a book, seeking temporary refuge in another world, his house lights flickered erratically and then went out completely. He began to doubt his own sanity. Was he responsible for all this tragedy? With each new death, Felipe's hopelessness grew, transforming into a dense fog that clouded his mind, preventing him from thinking clearly. He completely isolated himself, refusing to answer calls or leave his apartment in Omaha. The days blurred into a haze of paranoia and insomnia, each night a battleground against his own demons, against the shadows dancing in his peripheral vision. The smell of mold and sheer despair seemed to permeate the walls of his small refuge, suffocating him, making the air heavy. He felt that with every life spared from the air crash, death became bolder, closer, like a predator stalking its prey, tightening its circle with each victim. "You can't go on like this, Felipe. You need to get out of here. Get some fresh air." "It's coming for me," Felipe whispered, his voice broken, barely audible, almost a lament, his eyes fixed on an invisible spot on the wall. "This isn't healthy for your mind. You're going to lose it." The Nebraska winter was harsh, and the biting cold that seeped through the window cracks felt like a grim omen of an inevitable end. He had seen the news, knew about the macabre coincidences. "Felipe, I know you're shaken, that this is all too much, too hard to process, but ... Death. I tricked it. I challenged it. And now it's collecting. Everyone had died. The sound he had heard in his premonition, the same sound of the explosion, of metal twisting. It was real. Someone else had heard it. Where is that recording, Miguel? I need to hear it. It's the proof. Death was not only collecting, it was also mocking him, playing with his sanity, erasing the traces. He had prevented the air tragedy, but the evidence that it should have happened persisted, like a ghost, a scar in time. He felt a wave of nausea. Death's game was more complex, crueler, and more subtle than he had imagined. He had opened the door to something he couldn't control, something that refused to be tricked. They were on the flight. Or on the waiting list. I don't know, Felipe. It disappeared. The tower technicians said the file corrupted itself, as if it had never existed, as if it was erased by some invisible force. They tried everything, but they couldn't recover anything. It's correcting the course, Miguel. Every life I saved, it claims in another way. Look, I don't know what to say, but there's something even stranger. Yesterday, Chicago Air Traffic Control, 300 miles from here, received a ghost signal. A distress call. Flight 817. Out of nowhere. The aircraft wasn't in the air. There was no record of any flight with that number anywhere. The tower staff were in shock, and the audio, it sounded like a desperate distress call, with screams and explosions, sounds of metal twisting. They said it was like the plane was actually crashing, right at that moment, right there in their airspace. One morning, as he sat in the darkened living room, watching snowflakes fall slowly outside, the silence was abruptly broken by the doorbell. He froze, his heart leaping into his chest, almost escaping. I saved those people. I know I saved them. But death doesn't care about my good intentions. It always finds its way, always claims what's its own, and in ways I can't predict. Felipe, it's Miguel. Open the door, man. I'm really worried about you. We need to talk, and not over the phone. Who could it be? No one knew where he was hiding. He had gone to great lengths to erase his tracks. The doorbell rang again, insistently, with an almost aggressive rhythm, like a funeral toll. He ignored it, his body tense, every muscle contracted in alert. A shiver ran down his spine. There was something different about the ring, a dissonant melody echoing in his mind, a direct warning. Minutes later, he heard loud knocking on the door, accompanied by a familiar voice, weary but relieved. Felipe felt a momentary sense of relief, a small crack of light in his darkness, reality seeping into his bubble of fear. Miguel. He opened the door, and his friend entered, exhaling a strong coffee breath and palpable concern, visible in his eyes. Miguel's face was pale and tired, with deep circles under his eyes that betrayed sleepless nights. Felipe, for God's sake, what's happening to you? You disappeared off the map. No one can find you. And all those deaths, it's terrifying, man. Everyone's talking, the media's back on it. Miguel looked around, noticing the chaotic state of the apartment. Books strewn across the floor, empty coffee cups piled up, a persistent smell of stale food and neglect. I can't, Miguel. Who? What are you talking about? Felipe, you're really scaring me. Miguel approached, his brow furrowed in confusion and growing concern. Felipe hesitated for a moment, but the need to share the burden he carried was greater than his fear of judgment or disbelief. Miguel looked at him with concern, but also with a glimmer of something that seemed like understanding, a reluctant acceptance of the inexplicable. No, it's not madness. Felipe interrupted him, his voice gaining strength with a desperate conviction that bordered on insanity. Miguel sighed, sinking onto the dusty sofa, the sound of the doorbell and knocking still echoing in his mind. Felipe's breath caught in his throat, a guttural sound of terror. Miguel shook his head, a look of helplessness on his face. Felipe closed his eyes, his face contorted in agony. The revelation about the ghost signal from Flight 817 wasn't just news for Felipe. It was a direct blow, a punch to the gut, igniting a fresh flame of panic in his already fragile heart. He knew, with a terrifying certainty that paralyzed him, that he was being hunted. They were people connected to the flight, but also, in some way, to himself, directly or indirectly. He started inspecting every object, every food item he touched, every shadow in his Chicago apartment, where he had moved in a desperate attempt to escape the city where it all began, to start anew in an anonymous place. He was nearly struck by a runaway taxi that swerved onto the sidewalk directly towards him, appearing out of nowhere. The shock left him pale, his heart pounding, his breath caught in his throat, as if his lungs had forgotten how to function. The taxi driver, an elderly, trembling man, swore the brakes had mysteriously failed, out of nowhere, and that the car had veered on its own, uncontrollably. It was as if death had a signed contract, and his name was at the top of the list, stamped with urgency, an increasingly close and visible expiration date. He had interfered with the cosmic plan. He had broken an inviolable rule, and now death was angry, furious, determined to re-establish order. The air in his apartment felt thin, as if with each breath he consumed a little more of his remaining time, a little more of his own life, which was slipping through his fingers. Felipe saw the shadow of death pass by him, a chilling brush that made every hair on his body stand on end, an invisible, terrifying touch. It was the trap, death's attempt to claim him, a new tactic, a warning that he was on the wrong path. He rushed back to his apartment, locking the door with multiple keys and barricading it with heavy furniture, his ragged breathing echoing in the oppressive silence of the room. He slept with the lights on, waking at every minor noise, every creak of wood, every whisper of the wind that seemed to call his name. He could delay, deflect, but death always found a way, always adjusted its course, always tightened the noose. Felipe, you can't go on like this. You need professional help, someone who can support you. This is consuming you, destroying you. With each successful dodge, the feeling that the end was near grew stronger, almost palpable, like an invisible presence in every corner of the room, breathing down his neck. The irony was cruel. He had saved lives. He had become a silent hero, but in return, he seemed to be condemned. His own end delayed and reenacted in increasingly bizarre and personal ways. The sound of sirens outside, so common in a large, bustling city, felt like a constant omen, a soundtrack to his imminent end. As if death was approaching in concentric circles, shrinking the radius with each new victim, closing in around him. It's everywhere. It's closing in on me, and I feel it getting closer and closer. He frantically scribbled diagrams in a notebook, connecting names and dates with lines and arrows, notes and observations, trying to find a logic, a pattern, anything that would help him predict the next attack, the next trap set by fate. The strong smell of coffee, which once helped him stay awake during his nights of study and vigil, now made him feel even sicker, his stomach churning with anxiety and fear, a constant nausea. This wasn't just a series of unfortunate accidents. It was a deliberate, methodical pursuit with a grim purpose. Miguel, for his part, tried to convince himself that it was all coincidence, an inexplicable tangle of unfortunate events, a tragicomedy of chance, but with each passing day, it became harder to cling to that belief, especially seeing the genuine terror in Felipe's eyes and feeling the oppressive, heavy atmosphere that surrounded him like a dark cloud. Felipe began to study patterns with a morbid obsession. The deaths, he realized with a chilling clarity, weren't random. Felipe's paranoia reached unbearable levels, consuming every fiber of his being. One day, summoning the courage to leave his apartment for essential groceries, feeling the cold Chicago air on his face, he realized, with painful and undeniable clarity, that attempts to trick fate were futile, mere illusions, childish games. Miguel, who visited him regularly, even with his own life and work turned upside down, noticed his friend's sharp deterioration. The way his eyes seemed to carry an ancient weight, a profound sadness. "Help can't save me from this, Miguel," Felipe replied, his eyes glazed over, fixed on an invisible spot on the wall, a glimmer of despair and resignation in them. He remembered an old urban legend he heard as a child about a fatal note passed from hand to hand, bringing death to its last bearer.